What deserves to have its own cinematic universe? When I was kid, I just assumed all 80s action shows were in the same reality. They were all kinda filmed in Hollywood backlots and they all had the same look, so A-Team, Airwolf, Chips, Knight Rider, all existing in LA, and maybe we just never saw the interaction on screen, and somewhere across the ocean doing his own thing. Magnum Pi. I was watching a short video on YouTube and I found out that the guy that created the show also created The Greatest American Hero. Man, that would have been an amazing crossover. Ralph needs to find the A-Team because they have an old work buddy of theirs, Thomas Magnum, that's in serious danger. Meanwhile, Thomas Magnum has been investigating an organization called Knight Industries. An old project of theirs named Goliath, this one responsible for a string of bank robberies. Little does he know that the evil Michael Knight has been using alien technology to soup up the Goliath truck. Edit: I found the video on YouTube, not an ATM. In a way, I think it would actually be ruined. Some stuff is so clearly described, the camera in color of magic. And then there's stuff that is so intentionally abstract it would hurt for it to be shown. Even Pratchett's aversion to making maps. I liked someone's thought of assuming they had been smart back then, was to have Brendan Fraser's Mummy series to have been the start of it and just keep him as the adventurer for each movie thereafter. That would have been fun. Even though one of my biggest criticisms of the MCU is how they've managed to make a lot of people believe the only way an interconnected media universe can work is through individual solo movies building up to a big event over the course of 5-6 years. A League of Extraordinary Gentlemen series in the MCU style would rock. Apologies to Alan Moore for bringing this idea up. TBF, DC sort of tried this. Their first strategy was to do a 5-part Man of Steel series, sort of like a Nolan trilogy, but with more movies, because they believed the Avengers, 2012, was probably a one-off. When they saw Marvel was making bank with crossover stuff, DC thought we'll just try team-up movies with occasional solo films, like Suicide Squad, Justice League Dark, etc., and only rarely doing an Aquaman or Batman film. Then Suicide Squad did well commercially and no one liked it, so DC thought, okay, let's literally just do whatever solo movies we think will work. So, not just MCU's fault, so did some damage there too. Problem is, film studios still think audiences are silly enough to only want to origin tales. Like we all know Batman's fucking parents died, and who TF Clark Kent is. Wish they'd do more stories, like the animated show where they are one-offs or adaptations instead of trying to build a house from the ground up. There's nothing wrong with buying an old house and coating it in new paint and building add-ons. Problem is, film studios still think audiences are silly enough to only want to origin tales. I don't think that's necessarily a problem for cinematic universes in general, because Marvel proved it can start with just origin films and still make money, but I agree that DC films have exhausted the origin stories of Batman and Superman too much. I do think Miles Morales as the main Spider-Man in Spider-Verse has a chance of teaching people that were savvy enough to follow a different mantle of a popular character, but if WB executives know one thing, it's that everything is fine as written in blood in the WB lobby and they mustn't step out of line. I think someone at WB, as opposed to DC, had all the right information at their fingertips. They just put it together in the wrong order for their movie universe. A good solid Superman movie to start it off is a good idea. It's been a long time since anyone cared about the Supes movie, so let him shine. They then thought, Batman doesn't need another origin, just introduce him in Supes' second movie, which is probably a good idea. Unless you have both poorly set up Superman, making him a raging collateral damage uncaring machine with cheesy Jesus parallels that don't make sense and no motivation to help people, and decided your Batman is going to have an extensive dark and tortured backstory to justify them having a fight in their first meeting. Batman fighting Superman should be impactful because we already care about both characters and their dynamic. We know what makes this version of Batman tick, same for Supes. We like them both and we want them to work it out, but instead their different perspectives drive them to fight for logical reasons, similar to Captain America Civil War. Instead we got convoluted schemes and coincidences and contrivances to make them fight and didn't give a damn when Superman died. In his second movie, some people said DC rushed to Justice League and should have done solo movies. But I think BVS is the real culprit. It tore down a house that didn't exist yet so people couldn't connect with the characters for Justice League. I could ramble on the subject for days, frankly. You can finish The Way of Kings, even the whole series, without reading any of the rest of the Cosmere, and you won't miss too much. I only read the first Mistborn trilogy before, and I really enjoyed the Stormlight books. I just finished Mistborn Well of Ascension, taking a break to reread another series, then I'm going to read Hero of Ages, after that take a break from Cosmere before starting the behemoth that is Stormlight Archive, and note, I'm listening to the audiobooks. Those are 40+ hour long books. So the good thing about Stormlight Archives is that you don't have to read all the other Cosmere books, but you're going to be completely in the dark about who certain characters are, how certain things work, and why some concepts play out the way they do. I would definitely recommend starting chronologically by release date. I would recommend starting with Mistborn. The first era starting with the Final Empire is a complete trilogy of epic books. The Stormlight Archive is his magnum opus, and is currently in the fourth book of the first of 2 5-book arcs, so it's far from finished, which can be frustrating if you want some finality. Best place to start is probably just the chronological release order of the Cosmere books. Definitely read all of the ones that came out before Way of Kings before getting into the Stormlight Archives, or a lot of things won't make a lick of sense. Elantris is still among my favorites of his and seems so short and simple compared to his later works now. All they had to do was not fuck with boss and introduce a faction that does the same but has a different name. Thank you. Someone finally said it. Bethesda is like some demos action movie director when it comes to how they handled Fallout and, especially, the Brotherhood of Steel. Hey, these dudes have kick-ass looking power armor, laser guns and cool airplanes. Let's make them the good guys. There's xenophobic racist technophiles who only care about preserving technology so they can use it to destroy anyone who gets in the way of them gathering technology. They're pretty much the bad guys. Fuck it, power armor dudes. https://www.somanews.com/World of Warcraft 2 movie is finally here or not / I'm unsure of how legitimate this source is, but supposedly there may be a Warcraft 2 for us yet. I have been following this since Warcraft came out because I loved it so much. I know that the director of the first one isn't interested in pursuing it. Something about a leak of information regarding the second one. I think maybe someone else will take up the mantle. I think a Warcraft movie directed by Peter Jackson might be pretty sweet. They made a TV show that was supposed to be the Stephen King universe and they completely screwed it up. I was so excited for it and it wasn't his stories, just a few things borrowed from a couple of his stories, and not much really happened. It was all atmosphere and no action. It has to be something diverse in its styles but consistent enough to feel like not just a spin-off. Comic books are perfect because you got so many types of characters and worlds, but something like Hobbs and Shaw just felt like more Fast and Furious with less characters. My pick, is Universal should have actually stuck with the dark universe idea. I could have hit that sweet spot of diverse ideas that also make sense to cross over with each other. Sure, the new Mummy sucked, but if they stuck with it refined, it could have been a good series. But then that is an Indiana Jones movie featuring a vampire. It isn't a Dracula movie, and the draw is these famous monsters, so they need to be characters in their own rights. I think it walks a fine line because the obvious line is outcasts becoming a family, which I think is just dull. I think it would work best as several being morally ambiguous with common enemies at times, but then you need motives that are sympathetic that don't ruin the characters by making them too soft. Sliders. It's been 21 years since the show ended. The show started out with the technology to move randomly between dimensions, and by the end of the series the main characters had figured out how to slide at will, plus entire ships were able to travel across dimensions. The last episode ended with the hook for the upcoming final showdown in an interdimensional war. So now what? It's a post-war universe where people now are aware of the existence of other worlds. They could easily follow a core group of characters who have in-universe reasons for solo storylines. He's in another dimension, and can team up for big features or cameo in each other's films. There can be multiple stories spreading across several dimensions, all affecting each other simultaneously. Just have Rembrandt cameo in the first movie and continue from there. That's my choice as well. You start off with 4 movies, Mort, Ward Sisters, Guards, and Moving Pictures. If all goes well, you now have 3 main series running parallel, Death/Susan, The Witches, and The Watch, plus an extra spot for standalone stories. If all doesn't go well, at least you've done enough world building to continue 1 or 2 of those main series by themselves. A massive collaborative project containing science-fictional written works describing the behaviors and containment procedures for anomalies, which vary greatly in nature, from typical creepypasta monsters a lost Lenderman, to cognito hazards which can inflict harm on people simply by knowing about them, perceiving them, to an infinitely sprawling inescapable IKEA. The flexibility in what an SCP can be has led to some incredibly creative and cool ideas, and while most SCPs are generally independent and can be read and enjoyed without needing a ton of backstory, there's just enough of an overarching background and connections between events and anomalies that you can get really hooked into the lore of the world if that's the kind of thing that you can get drawn in by. I've heard it described as humanity's most impressive collaborative work of fictional literature since the Bible. I don't know jack about Warhammer, but I watched the stars. Holy hell, it was awesome. I'd love to see a cinematic universe provided it wasn't dumbed down and was given to a director and company that would do it right. It felt so epic and mysterious. Loved that feeling. Same. I briefly collected 40k as a kid but had no idea how deep the lore went. After watching a starts earlier this year and rabbit-holing explanation videos on YouTube, I can't help but think it would be an amazing universe to explore and expand on. The only downside is how dense the material is. Fans would never be happy with whatever Hollywood churned out, and non-fans would never understand what they're watching. The biggest issue I think in getting this to screen would actually be Games Workshop themselves. They seem to turn a lot of independent creators' projects bad. See what they did to Astartes after they took over the project from its creator. GW are actually making their own Plus network for airing animated shows. Who knows how that will turn out. I love the concept of cosmic horror, fear of the unfathomable, but the problem comes with describing it, makes it nearly impossible to translate to film. Dude, what I saw was so scary, like I can't describe it, just so gosh dang spooky, like tentacles maybe, but dude, I can't even tell you. If I could, you'd go crazy, so I can't. So trust me, really spooky. H.P. Lovecraft, essentially. strongly agree. As much as I would love for there to be a cinematic universe in which the lore and stories of Lovecraft unfold, it's quite difficult to truly capture, let alone envision, the complex horrors associated with cosmic horror. Although I feel like John Carpenter's The Thing did a pretty good job at portraying some aspects of Lovecraftian horror. If I remember rightly, the director of the first 3 Pirates of the Caribbean movies originally was working on a BioShock movie, but apparently it never got past pre-production, because when he was hoping to rely on a lot of practical effects instead of CGI after getting a glimpse of the games, but they quickly figured out that the movie was gonna carry a very hefty price tag, so they shelved it. This is tough. Where do we have 4 or 5 individual characters that could each support a solo movie with limited crossover and then have the group pulled together every 3 or 5 years? DC apparently can't make a movie to save its life. Star Wars bungled the torch pass just so badly it'll probably be 10 years before we see them attempt it again. J.J. Abrams' problem is that he creates mysteries with no solution, and writes himself into corners trying to think up the answers after the fact. This isn't a problem in an alternate universe where he can stop making Lost when he loses interest. I seem to recall he wanted to stop, but because it was still popular the network insisted it continue. It is a problem where is given the reins of a franchise built on careful management of lore and continuity. Well, they're making Foundation, so I guess you have your Asimovers there. The robot novels are in the same universe. We could do with more sci-fi classic verses. A lot of Alan Dean Foster's Commonwealth, That Gets You Prism, Isa Rigger, Flanks and a bunch of others. Or Peter F. Hamilton's Commonwealth Void Dreams series would be good. Pierce Brown's Red Rising series, or like I call it, mythological pantheon Game of Thrones in space. Ian M. Banks's Culture series. Some of the psychopath ship minds would make great cameos for some big names. There's one thing I don't wanna say because I wanna be the one to do it. Other than that, I'd say Magic the Gathering. I used to read the free comics on the Wizards of the Coast website and they were incredibly entertaining. Edit. It took me 2 seconds of scrolling down to see the thing I was talking about, which is SCP. The best thing about SCP is that anyone can make an SCP movie or any type of SCP media completely legally. Off the top of my head, multiple perspectives on the same Wii battle has happened a couple times. Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, Dear Clint Eastwood, portray the Japanese and American sides of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Tora showed both the Japanese and American sides of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, with each side's segments directed by someone from that country. Barney, Teletubbies, Dragon Tales, Arthur, Caillou, the Berenstain Bears, Sagwa the Chinese Siamese Cat, and Thomas and Friends. They have their origin stories in then the PBS Sleep where they have to fight JJ the Jet Plane and his friends to bring back the heart of the universe, Mr. Rogers. 2001 AD, the comic series that Judge Dredd came from. Dredd is fantastic, but he's just the tip of the iceberg. The whole setting is nuts. That perfect blend of goofy over-the-top satire presented with a completely straight face. That era of British sci-fi had such a wonderful trend of never winking at the audience. Stuff like Dredd and early Warhammer 40k was satire through and through, but it played it completely straight even though it was so goofy, which makes it 10 times funnier. It would have to be directed by Paul Verhoeven though, so they need to hurry up and get started before he gets too old. Discworld. There have been a few movie adaptations that were pretty decent. I've heard that the current Watch TV show is pretty bad though, that they changed too many things. There's going to be an animated movie of The Amazing Morris and I hope it's good, but I'm worried they'll take all the darker parts out and it will just be a straight-up comedy. This worry is based entirely on the art style of the poster and could be all for nothing. They need to make epic cinematic universe surrounding all the epic folk rockers in the 60s 70s, Dylan, Beatles, Hendrix, Young, Clapton, Joni Mitchell, Gordon Lightfoot, the band. All these greats have amazing solo stories and also circle each other a lot and would make for a great set of movies with interconnected actors and whatnot. Kim Harrison's The Hollows book series. I would love to see these made into a television series or at least some movies based on the books. About 10 years or so ago the CW was considering turning these into a TV series but it never came to fruition.